Record to the cloud. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. How did the food turn out? Are we okay?
Oh, I'm going to be running back momentarily. I'm on like a
Okay.
1 minute cook phase of it. Basically, I'm running about like 8 minutes, 10 minutes behind on my schedule for the day, and it's just not going well.
Yeah, that's okay. We're good. Okay, so we're recording. We're cool. For people who are just tuning into the recording, hello from the past. We are at the stage where we are going to recap what happened in Homework 5, Part 1. So far, we have loaded in the data, so this King County voting data, to a data frame called King Raw. We've glimpsed it and looked at the first few values of each of our variables. And now you're caught up. Congratulations. Just days late, but you know. Okay, so then we looked at each of our variables individually. For instance, we could say count how many rows we have for each of the distinct values in the precinct variable and show me the bottom 10 of the resulting data frame. So boom, boom, boom. We have Wolf and Woodside and other places I don't recognize because I don't know anything in Seattle past U District and Ballard maybe. We could, for instance, count the amount of rows in each of the races and show the first 10 columns of the, or 10 rows of the resulting data frame. We weren't really that interested in these values, if you'll recall. Yeah, counter group is just the word total. That's it. If you want further evidence, oops, I can spell. I swear I can. I know that I made a bunch of mistakes in the 6th grade spelling bee, but right now I can do it. And so on and so forth. I think we get the gist on showing those variables. So we move on to the second section, the quantities of interest. We're interested on 3 major executive races from the 2016 election. The president and vice president, the governor and lieutenant governor. And what do we do for that? We first made a new data frame, which is just King, and this Roy means races of interest, by filtering down to all of the values in the variable race that match percent and percent values in this vector, governor, lieutenant governor, US president, and vice president. So if you want to check that out, first 6 rows here shows the governor races in the Adair precinct. Bottom 6 rows show the president elections in the YPT 481234 precinct. Next, we wanted to determine which precincts are in Seattle or not. And one way that we did this was by first looking at our different precincts to find some sort of thing we could use to filter down to whether or not this was in Seattle or not. And then we made a data frame that had that column. And we did that by creating a new column called C flag, which is built off of an if else, where if the first 4 characters in the precinct string match this string here, SEA space, give me back the word Seattle, and if not, give me back the words not Seattle. And keep in mind, we had this space here because there's a place called C view. Okay, and then we created a data frame so that we could check the turnout for the presidential race. So the way that we did this was we filtered to the race US president and vice president. We selected just the columns race, precinct, counter type, and sum of count. And then we filtered to counter type the times counted, which is all of the votes that we have, all of those ballots that we counted, and then all of the registered voters. And then we've made the data frame wider, which is to say that we took all the variables in one column, turned those into their own columns, and then filled out those new columns with the values from the sum of count. And then we created a new variable called turnout, which was just the times counted divided by the registered voters. And if we want to take a look at that, we'll see. We have the race for US President and Vice President. We have a precinct called Adair or Alder Springs. We have the times counted, which is the ballots. We have the registered voters, which is every person registered in that precinct. And then we have their dividend, divisor. I don't know math words. We know how many people voted in that precinct. And that's it for part one. That was a really quick recap. Do we have any questions about all that stuff? I feel like we're pretty cool there. Okay, great. Let's get started with part two then. So part two, the first part is Democratic support rates. We want to get measures of Democratic support in each precinct for each of our three races. Our three races being the governor, lieutenant governor, and US president plus VP. You are asked to measure support as the percentage of votes in a precinct for the Democratic candidate out of all votes for candidates or write-ins. But this time, do not include blank votes or overvotes. Overvotes are where the voter indicated multiple choices in the overall vote count for the denominator. Hint, a good approach here is to compute the total votes in the denominator for each precinct and then merge, left join, on the Democratic vote count for each race in the numerator and divide the total votes. That is Dem support equals Dem count over total votes. We're cool with that math? Cool with that logic? Okay, to computing candidate votes. You will probably want to follow a process like this. Wow, shout outs to Chuck. Thank you for giving us the itinerary of what we're going to be doing. Step one, we're going to make a new data frame with the total number of votes cast for any actual candidates, including write-in, in each precinct and race. Hint, you will likely want to use the filter function followed by group by and summarize using the sum of count variable. Okay, so I'm reading this, and I'm thinking that we should, this is just how my brain works, but I think we should make a chunk for each of the steps here. I think that'll make it look nice and easy for me. So I'm just gonna call this one step one. Okay. So we want to make a new data frame with the total number of votes cast for any actual candidates. Okay, so let's start with our King C data frame. And likely want to use filter followed by group by, summarize using the sum of counts. Okay, so we actually want to know first, to get the total number of votes cast for any candidate, including write-in. So we want to know, oh, yeah, Hughes. What's up?
Can you just drop in that King C, how you made that variable? Because I think I named mine something else and got a little confused. So if you just drop in that code, I should be able to run it and have a King C.
Sure. Yeah, so this is it here. And this is after I made King races of interest, which is the data frames, the total data subset to just the races that are governor, lieutenant governor, and president. And then making a, how do I open chat? Okay. Making a identifier for which precincts are in Seattle and which ones are not. Okay, so we want to know total number of votes cast for any actual candidates, but it's unclear to me right now how to identify which ones are actual candidates and which ones are weird stuff that's in that same column. So let's do distinct race. We're also interested in precinct. And the way that we'll identify those things is the counter type. So if we look over here, oh, actually we need party, don't we? We need the party.
Party instead of precinct will give you probably what you want.
That's what I'm thinking, yeah. Okay. So, yeah. When we look here at the governor race, for instance, we can see that there's somebody in the Dem party. His name's Jay Inslee. He's our current governor. I think he won that one. Then there's somebody else in this governor race whose name is registered voters. I'm going to start to think that NP here is maybe not party, not a politician. It doesn't really matter what NP stands for me right now, but it does identify the people who are not a named person like Bill Bryant here, who's from the Republican Party and ran for governor in 2016. So if we are going to filter down our data set to include votes cast for any actual candidates, including write-ins. But write-ins is part of the NP party. So we're going to have to include that in how we're going to pare it down. So if we're going to do King C, we're going to filter. It's going to be across two different things if we want to keep actual candidates and the write-ins. So we're going to say, counter type, no, let's say party not equal to NP, because we want the parties who are Dem or Rep or Libertarian, Green Party, what have you. Or we want counter type to be equal to write-in. Are we cool there? We're cool with this step. And so if we do that, what we're going to get is party. We have people who are Dems, but we also have write-ins. We have people who are Republicans. We also have write-ins, so on and so forth. And also Green Party. This is Jill Stein. I don't know what CPN stands for. I'm sorry, Daryl Castle and Scott Bradley. I'm not the best citizen. Let's see. So we did the filter. We're comfortable that we've gotten down to just actual candidates and write-ins. We also want to group by and summarize using the sum of count variable. So let's see. Wait, we're trying to get the total number of votes for each of the candidates. I seem to have forgotten what sum of count does. So I'm going to check. Sum of count will, once it's pared down to just NP and write-ins, will give us all the votes for actual candidates and the write-ins. So we're going to group by precinct and race. We're going to summarize. What should we call this? Total votes any candidate equals sum of count. Cool. So as we can see, we have in the governor race, in the Adair precinct, 481 total votes for any candidate. Lieutenant governor, some people just didn't want to vote for a lieutenant governor, I guess. And president, 473, and so on and so on and so on. Sorry, I thought I heard click. Great. Oh yeah, we want to make this a new data frame. So let's call this King candidate, King any candidate. I don't remember that, what that does. Step 2, make yet another data frame with the total number of votes for Democratic candidates in each precinct and race. You want to check party of candidates and work only with the Democratic observations to get these vote counts. Hint, there are different Democratic parties for each races. Interesting. So step 2, we're getting just the Democratic candidates in each precinct and race. So first things, let's see. The distinct party and race. So who do we got here? We have Dem and Republican and NP, Dem, NP, Rep. And then in the president race, we have CPN, DPN. I think I need more information. I don't know what DPN is for sure. I'm confident that it says that's Democratic Party National, but we should probably also do type. And if we go over here, DPN says Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine. And I remember them. They took a big L. So we're going to call that DPN. Do we have any others? No, it's just Dem and DPN. Cool. So make another data frame, total number of votes for Democratic candidates in each precinct and race. So we're going to call this King C filter party percent and percent. This vector, which will have Dem and DPN in it. Seems like it worked to me. Jay Inslee and Cirrus and Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine. I feel like these are all the Dems we had. Then what do we do? They're different Democratic parties. Well, the total number of votes for Democratic candidates in each precinct and race. Okay. So we actually can just by precincts and race and summarize. We're going to call this total Dem votes. That'll equal sum of count. We're not so worried about the sum of count, not counting everybody the same way we had to with the NP and write-ins, because these are votes particularly for Democratic candidates. So if we look at it, we have governor race, 256 votes. Sure, that seems legit enough to me.
Quick question there. Do you need the summarize command?
You don't. You don't need the summarize command. Okay, yeah. You can actually just, this is genius. You could do rename Dem votes equals.
So you don't need the group by either.
Yeah. Wow. Where amazing happens. Right here, this class. But yeah, we remember those ones from before. 256, 258, 266. Same thing. Cool.
One thing that's a good practice, though, since we're going to be, we're eventually going to take this data frame and do what with it and the prior one?
We're going to join them.
Yeah. So what's a good thing to do when you've got two data frames of data like this with a lot of similar columns? Might want to pare them down. There's going to be a lot of duplicate columns. You could join on them too, but every once in a while that can cause some chaos. So something that might be worth doing, I generally would recommend all people sort of do in this case, is filtering. If you're going to join together a bunch of data frames, you might pare them down to just the columns you're interested in. Because in our one right there with the dem votes, it's got all those other ones. If you join them back and forth, it might do weird things like create duplicate columns.
Ooh, yeah, and then you'll get like the .x and .y, and you don't want all that. You're right. So let's select just the columns that we need then. We're probably going to be joining on what? Precinct column and the race column. And then what else do we need? The dem votes column. Makes sense to me. But do we need anything else? Do we need to pare down king at any candidate total? No, it's only got 3 columns. I'm going to call that good. And we're going to save this one to king dem votes. Great. So for step 3, we're going to merge the total votes data with Democratic votes data, then calculate a % dem votes variable for each race. Seems straightforward enough. Let's say king any candidate total. Then we're going to left join that with king dem votes by precincts and race. We're cool with this step. We're following. And so now what we get is our precinct, our race, the total votes for any candidate, and the dem votes. That's not going to have any issues later. There's no way. And then what do we need to calculate? A % dem votes variable for each race. Okay. So then we can do mutate dem votes equals, what's the name of this variable? Total votes any candidate. So we're going to do dem votes divided by total votes candidate. And we can see in a dare for the governor, for Jay Inslee, 53% of the votes. Sounds about right. Let's see. We made the new data frame. Total number of votes for actual candidates. Yeah.
Brian, could you go back to where you defined king dem vote?
Sure. So that was right here. We took the king C data, and then we filtered just down to dem and DPN in the party column. And then we renamed the sum of count dem votes because that was all who was left. And then we selected the precinct, the race, and the dem votes column.
Got it. I just didn't save it as an object. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you know it.
There's one in chat to Anna here. Oh, sorry, it's a direct message to me. She said, post the code for king any candidate, but I don't actually have it. Can you post the code for king any candidate?
Sure.
Oh, yeah, the total there.
You know it. All right, so let's see. The next section is called Combining It All. Once you've calculated Democratic voting percentages for each race, you'll want to put them back together with the precinct turnout rate data using a join. Then you'll want to make sure your data are shaped as I recommended above. 1 row per precinct, with columns for each of the relevant measures. If your data are in a format where you have a row for each race within each precinct, aka long format, you may find the pivot wider command useful for turning multiple rows for each precinct into a single precinct row with different columns for each race. Okay. So we've calculated the Dem voting percentages for each race, but our data not in the right direction. We want to put them back together with the precinct turnout rate data. Precinct turnout rate data. That was from part 1. Okay, we're going to go back and get that later. But right now I'm focused on, want to make sure your data are shaped as I recommend. 1 row per precinct. Oh no, we need that now. Okay, so what we're going to do is sorry, I had to check to see. I'm getting an error with my mutate function. Can I see the code for that section again? Which section, Katie?
The one we just did with underneath left join. Yeah.
Okay, so we had our king any candidate total data, and then we left joined with the king dem votes by the precinct and race, and then we mutated the percentage of Democratic votes for Democratic candidates per dem votes equals dem votes divided by total votes any candidate. Yeah, no worries. But I want to see our turnout. So this is for the presidential race, but we want turnout for anybody, right? So we probably want to make a new column or a new data frame here that we call.
But who did we calculate turnout for?
For votes for any candidate.
But turnout, the overall turnout rate for the election was only calculated using the presidential race, not all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be its own column, whereas we're going to have multiple columns for the percent vote for each Democratic candidate.
I see. I see. Okay, so we're cool to keep using that data frame. It should be fine. Okay. Once you've calculated Democratic voting percentages for each race, you'll want to put them back together with the precinct turnout rate data using a join. So we have, I didn't save this to anything. I'm sorry. What should we call this? King Dem? No. We should call it King Dem percentage. That'll be easier for me to remember what it does. So we're going to take the King Dem percent and we're going to left join it with King Pres turnout by precincts. That should be enough, right? Because then we'll have the total votes for any candidate, dem votes. What else? We have race is doubled up. I see now. That's why Chuck was like, You know what you should do is really pare down these columns so that you don't have to, yeah. I see. So I'm actually going to cheat and go back up here. And I'm going to so that when I go back down here and I run this, it'll run and it won't have any duplicates of race columns.
Can you go back to the last part you just did when you changed the variable, the king pres turnout variable?
Yes. So what I did was I removed the race column from it. So I deselected the race column because when we merged them together, we had two columns that were named race. And one of them, in the king pres turnout, for instance, only has the words US president and vice president in that column. And so we had a column that had them sort of in the correct way that we wanted, and one that was just the same word the whole way. So one thing I also could have done is instead to just rename them, but I decided instead to get rid of it up here.
Another thing for
you.
if for anybody who's in that similar situation, if they don't want to go and change the stuff higher up, they can also change it right before you join the data. You could just filter, like not filter, but select your data, like with whatever data frames we're working with all the way down there. Just grab the columns you want and then pipe them into the left join. And that way you can just do it right there in place if you want.
Oh yeah, I suppose I could have done any candidate total and then deselected race here and then left joined it with king dem. I jumped into the wrong chunk, but this down here. So that was an option as well. Okay, so we joined them together. Then you'll want to make sure your data are shaped as I recommended above, 1 row per precinct, with columns for each of the relevant measures. If your data are in a format where you have a row for each, okay. Yeah, so right now we have 3 columns per precinct that go along with each of our races. We actually want to make this column into 3 columns and fill up those columns with our percentage of dem votes. So the way that we're going to do that is pivot wider. Sorry, I'm looking up pivot wider. I'm so used to the archaic way of doing it that I always have to check.
So remember the arguments for pivot wider. They're nice because they're actually pretty informative. You want to take some, get some names from somewhere.
Yeah, and we want the names. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so you get your names from, and then you can just give it a column. You don't have to quote the column name in this case, but you can if you want. And then you get the values from some other column, and then that does it for you.
Values from, what was it? Was it just dem vote? No, it has to have per hand. Yeah. And
so might not be what you want. So like go and look and see what we've got.
so we don't have the race column anymore, but we do still have 3 precincts.
This reveals, again, the select problem. So what happens is if you pivot stuff out, any rows, any other values in any columns that differ across the rows can't be combined. And so it has to keep the number of rows. So what happens here is we have additional values we don't want that are preventing us from pivoting out. So if you go to the left, you'll see we have total votes for the candidates and dem votes, which vary across the different rows.
I see.
Yeah. And so
I see.
Dump those ones we don't want, which is why I usually, instead of doing negative selection, I do positive selection. Only grab the exact columns we need because it messes up your pivots.
Yeah. So we should just select precinct, race, dem votes. Should be everything, I think. Do we still have C flag?
We will want that at some point. I don't know where you can
Okay.
get it from,
I
though.
don't know where I can get it from either. Okay, well, if we run this, we will now see that there is one row per precinct with columns called governor, lieutenant governor, and use president, vice president. And these are filled with the percentage of votes for Democrats. Cool. Great.
We will want that Seattle column, so you might want to make sure we can get it and make
Yeah.
sure everybody else can get it too. And also, Sam says here in chat, I'd like to see that section with the select again. I'm getting an error that race doesn't exist.
It
Have
is
you
a social
spelled it?
construction. Sorry, what?
Yep. Okay, does it have a capital R is one thing, and two, check the data frame going into the select command to see if it has it.
Okay. I properly named my data frames. So I'm familiar that the Seattle flag is at least in the King C, and King C is here, and I can just...
Make sure to hover on what you're doing there for a second so people can see it. So what happened here is that there's one column we actually are interested in, which is whether or not they're in Seattle. But it's really easy to be going through something like this and not remember that you're going to need a column later. And so you have to go back up and then make sure to add it back where you want. So there where Kingdom Votes is created, he's adding back in C flag, which tells us whether we're in Seattle or not. So make sure to do that as well. And so when we get to the end of this one and calculate the sort of turnouts, you might walk everybody back through these again to make sure everybody's on page.
Yeah, for sure. So we made the King Dem votes now with a little extra Seattle. We're gonna have to do this join again, but it'll just run, and it will also keep our C flag column. And then when we join this, I see. This is supposed to have C flag also. Adair is not in Seattle. Okay. So yeah, we're gonna call this one Wide King. And next we go to graphing the results. So we want to graph turnout.
So before doing that, we might make sure everybody can get to this Wide King one displayed on screen.
Okay.
And then walk him back from the start there, because from here on out, it's pretty trivial.
Okay.
So I would walk him, show him White King and have everybody take a quick look at that.
Okay.
Make sure yours looks kind of like this, or if you're stuck earlier on, let us know and he'll go back through what was just done.
Yeah.
It's okay to not have times counted at this point too, but it doesn't hurt anything.
Yeah, so we have one row per precinct. We include the Seattle flag, so we know whether or not a precinct is in Seattle. We still want turnout, and we have a column per each of our races of interest with the percentage of votes for Democrat candidates.
Can I ask kind of a silly question, I guess? I accidentally did a typo. Instead of Wide King, I wrote Wide King without the D, and so now I have two objects that are created. Is there an easy way to get rid of the extra object in my global environment?
Sure. One such way is, yeah, you can do rm that object,
Okay.
but this deletes it. So be careful with the remove. In any context, in any language, I am always very scared of rm. So be sure you want to get it gone.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We're going to go back through all of the steps that got us to where we are before we start graphing. Okay, so we wanted to get the Democratic support rates. First, we had to compute candidate votes. So the first thing that we did was we checked what Dems and DPNs we had. We had to figure out the setup for how we could get write-ins, but also all of the actual candidates. We created King any candidate total from this same data frame we created in part 1 that included the column with whether or not something was in Seattle. We grouped by the precinct and race, and then we got the total votes for any candidate by summing the sum of count per each of these groups. So that was step 1 of question 1.
So, like we did at some other point, instead of summarize, can we do the rename on that? Or no?
We cannot, because we are also trying to add in the votes for write-ins. Let me show you what this data set looks like real quick. So if we do, I could just show this little portion. So if we show you what the data set looks like before we group by and summarize, we have the party, and we want to have the party for stuff that's not NP, except for the case when it's write-in and counter type. But we want all of the sum of count. So like we want to, when we group by the race and the precinct, we are actually adding together these 3 values when we do group by with and summarize. Whereas when we are down here and we rename them, this sum of count value is only for this particular race and precinct already. Does that make sense?
I think so. But now when I use the summarize function, I get an error that said summarize is grouped output by precinct, saying you can override by using the dot groups argument. I don't know what that means.
Yes, that is just a message. Like you can ignore that for right now because it's not providing any information for us. Like it's not, I don't know how to elaborate on what it means. Chuck, can you?
Yeah, so the gist of that is that's not an error. What it's doing is it's telling you its behavior. So what's happened is with this data set he's there, if you look at on 241, he's done group by precinct and race. Now, if you group on 2 items and then you summarize things, because he's essentially summarizing on races within precincts here, the resulting data that come out, it's going to have summarized everything across all the races within the precincts, but the resulting data will still be grouped within the precincts. This is just the default behavior of dplyr. If you don't want a grouped data frame to result from that, you could type ungroup at the end or add an argument to summarize that would drop the groups. So that would, for instance, what he just did there would get rid of that message. It would still show the message, but it wouldn't be grouped. So another thing you can do is in summarize, you could do dot groups equals drop in summarize, and it will get rid of that argument.
Drop.
Thank you.
Yeah, sometimes leaving things grouped will cause unexpected results.
Yeah, I don't know if this is still the case, but mostly I remember that this will mess me up when I'm trying to graph things, because things will come in already grouped and then it will turn into weird lines. You'll know it when you see it. Okay, yeah, so that was step 1. Step 2 was we wanted to find out which of the races were for Democrats and how many votes were in each one. And we did that by taking our King Seattle data, filtering just to the party is Dem or a DPN. And then we renamed the Dem votes because we no longer had to summarize over the several different candidates. And then we selected our precinct, our race, which we're going to use later. So to join, and then the Dem votes is going to be important after we've joined, and so is Seattle flag. So that's why I've selected those 4. And then in step 3, this is the join. This is why precinct and race was kept. We took king any candidate total, and then we left joined with the Dem votes by precinct and race. And then we created a new column called %Dem votes, which is equal to Dem votes divided by the total votes for any candidate. Cool. So let's check out what that looks like. So in this case, we have our precinct and our race. We still have the total votes for any candidate, which we use to calculate our percentage of Dem votes. We have the votes for Dems. We have our Seattle flag, and we have the calculated percentage of Dem votes. So that's what we have at the end of step 3. Then we combined it all into a wide king data frame. We took that same data frame from our step 3, and then we selected the precinct and the race and the percentage of Dem votes and the Seattle flag, and then we left joined it with the turnout column or turnout data frame that we made in part 1. We left joined it by just the precinct, and then we pivoted wider. So we took one column and made it into several columns using the names from, so like the values from this column are going to make the value, the names of the new columns, and the values from our percentage of Dem votes. So each of the cells in that one would fill the cells of the new columns. Could you go over that change you had to make in part 1? I'm still getting that error. Sure, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done it that way. So in part 1, when I made this presidential turnout, what I did was I had the King Seattle data. I filtered down to just the president's race, and then I selected race. Why would I select race here? Anyways, the precinct, the counter type, the sum of count, and then I filtered to counter type for just the times counted and registered voters. And then we made a wider data frame to create our turnout column. And then this thing I added here just today, which was I got rid of the race column. We didn't need it for when we created the wide king data frame down there. Do you want me to copy paste this, Sam?
Sorry, I guess what I just don't understand is that, yeah, if we're getting rid of that race column, that's what the error is telling me, that I don't have a race column. And so I guess I'm just not understanding why.
I see. That means that somewhere in your King Dem percent, there is not a race column. So in the end of your step 3, so like here, that means we're missing this column.
Yeah, can you paste the exact set of code that is giving you that race error?
Yeah, and I do have the race column in that King Dem percent, which is odd.
Odd indeed. Okay, wide king, King Dem percent, and then select. I'm just going to copy paste this over here.
And the select command in there is giving you there's no race?
Can't subset columns that don't exist.
There must be some typo in there. Oh, I think I had to do King C because I had a different label than King Pres turnout.
I see. Yeah, yeah. Because we still want the turnout column. So the last question in part 1, the resulting data frame, that one should be what you join in.
Yeah, yeah. So I had that one labeled King C instead of King Pres turnout, but it seems like that's where things are getting changed. I don't know. Maybe it's not worth spending a bunch more time on the lab.
I got all day. They don't pay me by the hour. No.
So right there, Brian, can you run the Kingdom perk and then run it with the select? So run it first without the select, yeah.
So just run this.
Yeah. Okay, now run it with the select command. Now run it with all of it, the pivot wide, including the pivot wider. Run the trace back on that.
Okay, let's see.
Oh, duh, I know what it is. Easy
What's
error.
it?
Scroll up. So look what happens when you do the left join. It's not race, it's race.x. It's because the King C has a race column in it, and so does the thing, but you're not joining on it.
So this is race.x.
Yeah, and so basically
Oh.
it means you got to drop race. You have to either join on race or drop race from the one that shouldn't have it. Basically, one of them shouldn't have the race column at all because it only contains one race, probably. If you're doing it right? Because like King Pres turnout didn't have race in the one above, but if you have King Pres turnout and it has a race column, you just got to get rid of it. See?
Okay, cool. Thanks.
All right. So that takes us to wide king. And now we can start making plots. We did it. So for turnout, we're going to make a scatter plot where the horizontal axis, the x equals in our aesthetic, is number of registered voters in the precinct, and the vertical axis y is the turnout rate. The color is the precincts in Seattle, one color, and use a different color for the other precincts. Do you observe anything? Okay, so we're going to take wide king, throw that in a GG plot. We're going to make a geom point. And that's kind of all we need to know so far. I misspelled that. Okay. But what are our aesthetics? Our aesthetics are our x is equal to the number of registered voters. I don't remember. What is the number of registered voters thing called? It's just called registered voters. Oh, thank goodness. So we're going to say registered voters. Note, I'm putting it in backticks because it has that space in it. And if I just put quotes, ggplot was going to yell at me and just call something registered voters. Then our y-axis is going to be turnout rate, which embarrassingly I did not capitalize. It does not look cute. It just says turnout. But I could go up here and rename turnout rate equals turnout. It says okay. And we also wanted color. So color equals flag. And It removes these 2 rows here that are containing missing values. This is because there's 0 people registered there. Is that right, Chuck? There's something, I know that this is not a problem, but I think it's because there's 0 registered voters in some precinct.
Yeah, there's probably missings. You could also look to see if there's not a numbers. It might be the case that there's some precincts which you did a calculation for them, like the turnout rate, and you were dividing by 0.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. Cool. This isn't very easy on the eyes. So I'm just going to add a couple things. First, I like theme black-white. I think that this looks way easier for me to look at. But also these dots are really on top of each other. So I'm going to map alpha equals 0.3. And this will make them just a little bit more translucent. And it already seems like, well, in Seattle and places, turnout rate was slightly higher. That's what I get out of this scatter plot. And turnout rate already has this nice little title. That's nice.
Something you could do on that is you could do something like do a geom smooth on it, grouped on the C flag, and then you get a line for each the Seattle and non-Seattle precincts, and you could see if they're like how different those lines are.
Geom smooth, a group on C flag.
It ought to do it with the color one being in there to begin with, so you probably don't have to do anything.
Okay. I mean, those seem pretty similar lines to me, but good to know. Cool. All right. Now let's visualize the Democratic support rates for the 3 races within each precinct for sufficiently large precincts. Limit the data to precincts with at least 500 registered voters. Use the filter command. Make a line plot where the horizontal axis X indicates precincts and the vertical axis Y shows Democratic support rates. There should be 3 lines in different colors, 1 for each race of interest. Do not label the precincts on the horizontal axis. So we're going to add this scale X discrete breaks equals null. Is one method for doing this. You should, however, arrange them on the axis in order from smallest to largest. Okay. In terms of support for the Democratic candidates for president, that is the line plotting percentage support for Obama. That's a typo.
From the prior homework.
Should be smoothly increasing from left to right. The order of the lines in the legend should follow the order of the lines at the right edge of the plot. Okay. To do this, we need to use the wide version of the data. Order the precinct based on Democratic support for the presidential candidate, and you'll want to use forecast factor reorder on precincts. And then we can reshape from wide to tidy using pivot longer, so we have one variable giving the race and another giving vote percentage. Yeah, okay, this is a lot. Let's do it. So we're going to start with our wide king data. And what was the first thing? We wanted the sufficiently large precincts. So we are going to filter. What tells us the size of the precincts? Let's see, registered voters. 3 races within each precinct for sufficiently large precincts. Yeah. So we're going to say registered voters is greater than or equal to the number 500. What does that look like? None of these numbers seem less than 500 to me. I don't know which precincts are small in Seattle. Then what do we do? We are going to want to reorder our precinct column based on Democratic support for the presidential race.
Note the first thing about this is we'll want to, okay, so never mind. We want to do this with the current version of the data, the 1 row per precinct, and then flip it after. But do you know how to use the FCT reorder with that? Have you used it before that way?
Here's what I think it does. You do like mutate precinct equals factor reorder precinct by the president votes. I guess it would already have this one. You could just do US president. I've gotta have all the people standing there. I can't. Like this. And it should just reorder by the values in there, right?
Yeah.
I don't have to specify like minimum or descending or anything like that. Right. And when you put this out, it's not going to show anything different. But it is reordered. This is now a factor, so we can see that much. And that it is the numbers that are associated with the factor variable now are related to the order of this column.
Which means if you arrange it on precinct now, it's not going to do it alphabetically. So you can display that.
It did it. It arranged in alphabetical order still.
Make sure, that's odd. It should definitely not have arranged it. So make sure that the levels are, oh, can you scroll to the right? Yeah, no, it didn't arrange properly. So what is going on here? Let me test this really quick.
Mm-hmm.
But it absolutely should not be doing that. Where's that?
A function like max, perhaps. Yeah, that's what I thought. Times I've seen people use it, they put like max here. And then when you run it, yeah, it still didn't go. I don't know.
Oh, you know why? Your data's still grouped by precinct. It can't do the factor reorder on grouped data. It's actually grouping the factor levels within the precinct.
There it is. So here is such an error. So I should actually just go up and change it in the earlier one so that I don't have to think about it, about why there's an ungroup at the start of something. But
this is the danger of leaving your data grouped. So it actually technically occurs all the way up where we were looking at it earlier, which was where the precinct and race operation was done, where it was grouped by both of those right there. That was the source of the entire thing.
I see. But we already did the drop, so I had to rerun everything.
Rerun everything, and you'll be good. And then verify stuff is not grouped as you go down. And you can see with all the tibbles you're displaying, nothing is grouped because it'll pop up a little group thing next to the tibble 6x8. You see right there?
Yeah.
So if you keep going, you'll see that that's just what it was, as it wasn't. Yeah. Gotta be careful with them groups. So what he took out up there was, he didn't actually take anything out. He added this command, which I'll show you, was
yeah, here.
That thing I just posted in chat was added to the summarize command. It's the same thing as adding the ungroup command after summarize. It's just a way to drop the groups. You could also, all the way down where we're at before it goes into that FCT reorder command, you could also just put ungroup there and it would do the same thing. The thing is, we're just trying to drop these groups because they're making it so the mutate operation happens within each category of the grouping, but it can't reorder the precinct factor inside levels of that factor, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I guess a little grumpy with us.
Yeah. Yeah, this is really neat. The little dot groups equals drop. I did not know about that. Yeah, so we already reran everything. And now when it runs like this, shows us Nathan and Hom Lake, which if we scrolled over here, would show that the president Dem votes share for the president would be really low. It's ordered down here based on this in ascending order, and therefore it tells us which precincts have that. Cool, cool. So now that we have that, we can reshape back from wide to tidy form using pivot longer, so that we have one variable giving the race and another giving vote percentage. I see. So we are going to pivot longer our same 3 columns. And how are we going to do this? Names 2 is going to be race and votes. And then is there like a values from? Sorry, I'm a caveman. Okay, so it's names 2, and that just becomes race because that's what the new column is going to be. And then its values 2 is what I was putting in that other thing. That's going to equal votes. And then the columns that we're going to be collapsing into this new set of 2 columns from 3. Okay, I see. They're handling things in the chat. The columns that we're interested in. Let's see if we do glimpse. We're interested in columns 6, 7, and 8. So I'm just going to do columns 6 through 8. And now we're kind of back where we were before. We have this precinct is tripled because now our race columns has become 1, and we have Dem votes per race per precinct. Cool. Now what? We need to plot this. We want to make a line plot on the horizontal axis, x equals precincts. Okay. Type this into a ggplot, and we know we're going to want g on line, and we already know that we want this little piece of information up here. Okay. But what are our aesthetics? Aesthetics are x equals precinct, y equals votes. Oh, this is actually for consistency. I'm sorry. Do anything else? Race.
So what do we got going on there? What do you see that's the issue?
I'm thinking that I need to group race me about this plot. This is three-dimensional. I don't know about all the information that I see here. Okay, so what we have is across the x-axis, we have precincts in ascending order of Dem vote share for the president. On the y-axis, we have the percentage of Dem votes per race with a line indicating at each precinct. I'm a little bit confused here, Chuck.
So what you're seeing down here is you've got, so all we care about in this thing is looking at the relationship between like the governor, the lieutenant governor's race versus the president, because we've ordered the precincts based on US president and vice president. The line for US president and vice president is the smooth line in the middle, monotonically increasing across the plot. So it's always in order increasing US president and vice president. So it's kind of interesting to see that the voting for governor and lieutenant governor is on average below the US president and vice president line and kind of orbits around it, which indicates that in different precincts in King County, on average, the US president and vice president was more likely to be voted Democrat than the governor or lieutenant governor, which means that maybe it was some sort of contentious race where people preferred the Democratic candidate over the Republican candidate, that particular one, but not for the lieutenant governor and governor's races. And also you can kind of see that in some particular places, maybe the US president candidate wasn't super popular, but the governor did really well or something. And so you can kind of see that these races don't track each other perfectly, but in general, they sort of do, right?
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, because I feel like any of these like long lines, like anything like this one here, saying that people were really into Inslee, maybe not so much into the Clinton-Kane ticket, or conversely, like this line down here. Cool.
Could you just wanted to look at the code again?
Oh, yeah. Great. Oh, we're at the bottom. We did it. Although I'm not feeling these default colors here and the way that these lines look. That's it. Do we have any questions about part 2? Anything we want to see again? Any code questions? Glad to hear it, Stephen.
Could you just like walk through what's happening with the pivot longer again and like which values are going to where to replace things like that?
Sure. So if we, before pivot longer, let's check out what that data frame was looking like. So here, we have what's called a wide data frame, which is to say that we don't have, what is it? I forget the words that make a data frame tidy. One variable per column, one row per observation, and one value per cell. We don't have that anymore. So the reason that we want to make it longer is because we actually have one variable has become 3 columns. And so what's happening when we do the pivot longer is we're saying we want to make a new column and its names are going to be race. And we also want to make a second column and it's going to be named percent Dem votes. And the way you're going to make that is you're going to take the information from the columns I've specified here, which I just use the numbers for them. I said for columns 6, 7, and 8, take the names from these and populate our new race column. And then take the values from each of these and populate our %dem votes column. And so then when we look at it pivoted, the names from those 3 columns became the race column and the values became the %dem votes column.
Thank you.
You know it. Yeah, this is so much nicer than spread and gather. It's ridiculous. I feel like my dad being like, son, you need to learn how to drive a manual transmission every time I bring it up. But yeah, well, do we have any other questions? If not, I'm going to stick around for a little bit in case you have any other questions that are maybe related to this homework, maybe not. But thanks for stopping by, everybody.
Yeah, I'm helping Nandini here really quickly with one that she's got a little issue here, and I'm not sure exactly what it is. Let me see. Working through the code here, but I have to. Oh, wait a minute. Did I look at that right? Some data.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might, if you can, here, I'm gonna free it up so that the sharing can be done. That's sharing options, all participants. Okay, yeah, go ahead and share and let me take a quick peek.
Yes. There, do you see it?
Yeah. Okay. So, okay, so, where is this?
I've used the original data and kind of moved it around to get the white data, 1 per row.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that looks fine right there. Now, okay, go to the next one.
Yeah, the graph is also pretty much exactly like.
Yep, that looks great. Go to the next one. Okay, so here.
So I'm trying line by line.
Yep, that looks perfect.
And then for cats.
So can you scroll over to the right in your current display? So down there, the little right button next to governor.
Okay.
Okay, that looks fine. Okay, pivot longer. Calls those okay. So go, scroll up slightly. Just yeah. Okay. So when you run to the next one, including the arrange, what exactly does this look like? Yeah. So go run from there for yeah.
It's running by precinct and not.
Yeah, but that's by U.S. President, Vice President, and it's rearranged precinct in that way. So precinct itself is capturing that number. So it seems to be working correctly.
Oh, okay. I thought we were seeing. Okay, I think I might have expected some other. I was seeing something like Nathan and stuff like that in the precinct.
Yeah, you've got it arranging on descending precinct. If you take off the descending, you'll get the same thing he had because he had it on ascending, which is just no descending. Yeah.
Okay, but I think this is what we're kind of expecting, so I'll keep it as is and move forward.
That's
okay.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.